If you're here to see critical thinking applied to the claim that the Earth is flat, then welcome to Genetamics. My name is Tim. Ironically, many flat earthers, or flurfs, claim to be truth seekers and or critical thinkers. So let's run their claims through my patent-pending Iris critical thinking system and see how they stack up. 2D or not 2D, flat is the question. The first step of Iris is to identify the claim and to check for any red flags. We're going to entertain two hypotheses, and we'll need to consider two models in order to thoroughly investigate this claim. Either the Earth is flat or it's a sphere. Other potential shapes are not going to be considered. Before we start, it's worth noting that all models are wrong to some degree by definition. However, some models are useful because they closely correspond to reality and allow us to make testable predictions about what we expect to see. Let's kick things off with the globe model. In this model, we have a spinning globe in space. It's not a perfect sphere, it's an oblate spheroid. It's slightly thicker in the middle. The globe rotates once every 24 hours, and the sun is distant, illuminating half the spinning globe at any one time. The globe additionally orbits around the sun. Each orbit takes 1 year, 365 and a quarter days, which leads us to adding an extra day once every 4 years, in what we call a leap year. The axis of rotation is off-center relative to its orbit around the sun, giving the sphere a tilt as it's spinning approximately 23.5 degrees. The northern and southern extremities which mark this axis of rotation are called the poles. Finally, we have the moon, which orbits the Earth. The moon is tide-locked, which is to say that it mainly presents one side to the Earth. And there's a bit of a wobble in this, which is visible during a lunar cycle, or a lunar orbit. The huge mass of the globe Earth causes gravity. The moon has its own smaller gravity, smaller due to its smaller size, and therefore smaller mass. We'll talk more about gravity later, but it's worth noting that gravity causes all celestial objects of sufficient mass to form a roughly spherical shape. We can easily observe this with the Earth, Moon, Sun, the other planets and other moons in our solar system, and all stars, planets and sufficiently massive moons we've observed elsewhere. Here is a brief summary of the globe position. So let's take a look at the flat Earth model, and immediately we start to run into problems. It doesn't seem to be a consistent model that all the flurfs agree on. About the only thing I can say for 100% certainty about this model is that it's not a sphere. I think the consensus among flat earthers is that it's a flat circular disk. It may be stationary, it may be accelerating, depending on who you talk to. It might have a dome covering it, which some people call a firmament, onto which the stars are projected. The sun and moon are relatively close by within the firmament, or possibly outside, depending on who you talk to. The edge of the disk is a massive ice wall, and there may or may not be more land beyond the ice wall. The ice wall is guarded and people are blocked from visiting it. Who is doing the guarding varies. Antarctica is therefore not a continent. The only other consistent claim that seems to be made by the flurfs is that lots and lots of people are lying to them, and everyone else, about the shape of our planet. In other words, there is a massive conspiracy, which is one of our red flags. I will come back to the conspiracy point a bit later. So a quick summary of where we are at this point. I'm aware that this claim has already been debunked, thousands of years ago in fact, by the ancient Greeks. However, we will resolutely ignore this red flag from this point onwards, purely in the interest of practicing our critical thinking. We have a red flag for conspiracy. We have a red flag for an extraordinary claim, mainly because it does contradict mainstream science. So we'll need to see better and more consistent explanations for observed phenomena provided by the flat Earth model than those we have for the globe Earth model if this claim is going to be upheld. Moving on to the research phase, we can see that our sources for the flat Earth claim seem a little unclear. We don't seem to have a consistent model, so we're going to add a red flag for that. A better explanation appears to exist already as well, so we'll add a red flag and dig into details in the next phase. I have linked a bunch of sources of information in the description section below. More on these in the summary section later. Moving on to investigation. There's 3 potential red flags to have a look at here: insufficient evidence, evidence not supporting the claim, and ignoring contradictory evidence. So let's dig into some observations and evidence. Now, this isn't a completely comprehensive list. There are definitely a few items that are not included here in the interest of time. I'm presenting what I hope is sufficient in order to investigate this claim. Well, the first observation is that, to the naked human eye, the Earth does indeed appear to be flat. Frankly, I agree with this. The horizon does not have an obvious curve from the ground. On the flat Earth model, this is explained because the Earth is actually flat. How do you explain this on the globe model? Well, the Earth is a very large globe, and at the local level it appears to be flat. We can check this by zooming in to a circle. If you zoom in far enough, you can no longer detect the curvature. I don't think you can rule this one either way. Fortunately, we have plenty of other data points that we can use and observations we can make to help us to distinguish between the two potential claims. I will return to this slide shortly, but before looking at the other items on this list, I would like to take a look at the Sun for a bit. From what we know from observation, half of the planet is experiencing night time. At any particular time of day, the Sun is apparently not shining on that part of the planet. So on the flat Earth model, the Sun cannot be very far away, because if the Earth was a large disk and if the Sun was distant, then the Sun would be illuminating all of it at the same time. There would be no staggered night and day. Daytime on the flat Earth model is apparently caused by the local Sun moving around and only illuminating parts of the flat Earth at any one particular time of day. There are immediately multiple issues with this particular explanation. How do you explain sunrises and sunsets? The Sun is not getting further away or getting smaller. It is dipping below the horizon. We can see it doing this. Also, the apparent size of the Sun doesn't change, which it would have to if it was a local Sun and moving further away. We can dig into this claim a bit further by looking at shadows cast by sticks in the ground. This has been explained wonderfully by Physics Explained, our YouTube channel. I've linked that particular video in the description below. The idea is if you plant a stick or a pole vertically into the ground and then measure the shadow that is cast at noontime on the equinox, and you can use the length and angle of the shadows to make some interesting calculations. This is exactly the experiment that was performed by Eratosthenes, the ancient Greek, who used the results of this to make a first estimate of the circumference of the planet. The prediction from the globe Earth model is if you plant a stick on the equator, it will not have any shadow at all. If you plant a stick in the ground at the latitude of 40 degrees north, then it'll have a 40-degree angle to the shadow that's cast by the stick, specifically at the equinox at midday. Now, in his video, Physics Explained does this with Kampala and Ankara. The interesting thing is if you take these observations and take the known distance from Kampala and Ankara and the angles measured, you can actually use this and a bit of simple trigonometry to measure, according to the flat Earth, how far away the Sun must be. And according to these calculations, it's only 5,300 kilometers away and is apparently only 49 kilometers across. So we have two explanations for the same phenomena. One of them is the Sun is very distant and the Earth is curving a certain amount, which is why we see this 40-degree angle. And the other explanation that accounts for these observations is that the Earth is flat and the Sun is relatively local. Where the problems start to creep in for the flat Earth model is if you plant another stick at another point of latitude and then see what happens then. Unfortunately, this is where the flat Earth model breaks down, because the third stick will not conform to expected outcomes. And even better, you can do this at hundreds of locations with hundreds of sticks, which is exactly what Simon Dan did on his channel, where he got lots of people to try this out on the same day at the same time of the year. I'll also link that video in the description below. So this simple observation of shadows cast by sticks has already caused major issues for the flat Earth model. We also have problems when we're looking at how the Sun never sets in Antarctica in the northern winter. So the predictions, again from the globe model, because the globe rotates and tilts, at that time of year, Antarctica will be constantly lit by the Sun. So how can it be that there's constant sunlight all the way around the edge of the circle, all the way through the southern summer? There doesn't appear to be anything mechanistically in the flat Earth model that would account for that. Interestingly enough, there's something called the final experiment, where an intrepid chap called Will Duffy got together a bunch of flirfs and globers and took them on an expedition to Antarctica to film the 24-hour sun, which they successfully did. The upshot of that was one of the flat earthers called Jeran from the channel Jeranism giving up on the flat earth altogether. As usual, I've linked to it in the description below. The flat earth model also has an issue with seasons. There's some talk that maybe the orbit of the sun changes to the other tropic during the year. Unfortunately, again, contradicted by the idea that the sun never sets in Antarctica. If the sun is always shining all the way around the edge, how can it also be orbiting the tropic? It doesn't seem to make any sense. The moon also causes some issues. So again, how do we account for moonrise and moonset? It's completely unclear on the flat earth model. The moon phases, you might be able to somehow explain that on the flat earth. It's fairly straightforward on the globe. The moon is orbiting the earth. The sun is distant. The sun is lighting up different parts of the moon as it's orbiting the earth. The very phenomenon of lunar eclipses, again, how does the flat earth explain this? With the globe, the sun is on the far side of the earth to the moon, and the earth is causing a shadow on the moon. That's what causes a lunar eclipse. The shadow shape of the lunar eclipse is always circular, which is caused by the earth, which is a globe. Again, why is it not a disc-shaped shadow or some kind of variation on that? If it was the flat earth model, it doesn't make any sense. As mentioned earlier, the moon is tide-locked to the earth. It's always showing pretty much the same face to the earth. However, if you go to the south, if you go down to New Zealand, for example, and take a picture of the moon, it's upside down compared to in the north. And again, how would you account for this on a flat earth model? You've got one big disk, everybody's looking up the same way at the moon. How come it's upside down in one half and not in the other? On the globe model, this is fairly straightforward. Essentially, in the southern hemisphere, you are upside down to where you're standing in the northern hemisphere. So when you look up and look at the moon, you see it the other way up. There are also multiple issues when we're looking at stars. If we look at Polaris, which is almost directly above the North Pole, this is visible from the north, but not from the south. The flat Earth explanation from this, or the only one that I've heard, is that it's too far away to be seen from the south. Whereas the globe explanation is that Polaris is obscured by the very body of the planet that we live on, and that's why you can't see it from the south. Then the Southern Cross, which is pretty much directly above the South Pole, is visible from the south but not the north. So again, how would a location like the southern part of South America, the southern tip of Africa and Australia, why would these three locations all be able to see the Southern Cross, whereas all of this can't see it at all? Look how far away these appear to be on this model. Distance doesn't work as an explanation. The explanation on a globe, of course, is fairly straightforward. The Southern Cross is obscured by the globe itself from the north. You can't see it because the body of the planet is in the way. And then, I think as we're all aware, the stars do rotate in the sky, and they rotate counterclockwise in the north. Now, this is accounted for on the globe model by the rotation of the planet. On the flat Earth model, you could account for it with the firmament or the dome rotating, or the projection of the stars on them rotating. However, the stars in the south rotate in the opposite direction. They rotate clockwise. And again, this makes perfect sense. If you're on a globe and you're looking south from the south, you'll see things rotating in the opposite direction as when you're looking north in the north. And again, how do you account for this on a single flat disk? Now, half of the disk is seeing things rotating counterclockwise and the other half is seeing things rotating clockwise. Doesn't make any sense. Coming back round to our first slide, we've also got a few items on here that we need to look at, like ships disappearing hull first over the horizon. This was one of the observations that convinced the ancient Greeks that our planet was actually curved or a globe. This is accounted for on the globe model by curvature. The bottom of distant objects will be obscured first because they will disappear over the curve first. How do you account for this on a flat Earth model? I don't think you can. Flat earthers will sometimes point at photographs indicating that we can see further than we should be able to see on a globe. There are usually issues with this, more to do with the mathematics that's being deployed, but a lot of the time we can see further than we should be able to due to elevation and atmospheric refraction. This is evidenced by the fact that some of these distant photos are only possible on certain days when the atmospheric conditions allow for it. But we still can't see as far as we should be able to see if we actually lived on a flat Earth. Why can't we see the Himalayas from the Alps if the Earth is flat? Again, allowing for the correct atmospheric conditions, that should be possible some days of the year. Of course it's not, because they're massively obscured by the curvature of the Earth. We also have gravity to deal with. Where does gravity come from on a flat Earth? This is why there's some debate about whether or not the Earth is stationary. Some people have suggested that it's actually accelerating at 9.8 meters per second squared, which is why we feel the apparent gravity. The unfortunate side effect of that is that it won't take all that long before you reach the speed of light, which is the fastest speed we're aware of. And so, yeah, it's not a possible explanation that we're actually accelerating. If we are stationary, then where does gravity come from? How does gravity work? And why is our flat Earth not a globe like everything else is? The last thing on our list is direct flight times in the south. One way that flirfs try to deal with this is to deny that direct flights actually exist in the south, but they do. You can just go and Google them, you can book them, you can take them. The problem that they've got is that it's a very, very long way on their map from, say, South America to Australia. And the flight times between South America and Australia just don't correspond to this particular distance on the map. And what about photographic and video evidence? What's that you say? We also have thousands of videos and photographs from space that show that the Earth is a globe, from all the space agencies, whether national or private, from the live stream on the International Space Station, from weather balloons launched by amateurs. Let's just briefly summarise our investigation. The claim that the Earth is flat, there doesn't appear to be sufficient evidence to support this claim, and a lot of contradictory evidence gets ignored by flat earthers. Looking at the counterclaim, however, we do seem to have adequate explanations that all the evidence we can see and observations we can make are confirmed by the model that we have for the oblate spheroid Earth. There were lots of red flags in the original identify phase, and nothing we have discovered helps to mitigate any of these. I promise to come back to conspiracies. Not all conspiracies are false, but these days most of them are pure bunk. I have not run the numbers on this. This is simultaneously pure conjecture, but potentially also a useful rule of thumb. In my opinion, conspiracies essentially follow the inverse square law. The likelihood of a conspiracy being true decreases proportionally by the square of the number of people who would have to be involved. So for Flat Earth, we're looking at everyone who works for NASA and all other national and private space agencies, all physicists, all astronomers, all cosmologists, all airline pilots, all surveyors, all cartographers, anyone who uses long-range weaponry such as artillery, naval guns or missiles, hell, pretty much anyone and everyone with a high school level of understanding of physics and mathematics. And why would there be such a massive conspiracy? The only vaguely plausible reason I've heard is because there's secret land masses out there beyond the ice wall that the secret ultra-powerful elites want to keep for themselves. And flat earthers can feel special having knowledge that nobody else has, which they can share online, but which the self-same aforementioned secret ultra-powerful elites won't immediately murder them for sharing. Yeah, if likelihood could ever reach nil, this would be it. The model for flat Earth is woefully incomplete and fails to address most of the basic observations that anyone can make. On top of all that, we have concrete photographic and video evidence from space. In summary, we can safely dismiss this claim and not waste any more time on it. We can also note that, even at this late stage, the claim is gaining more red flags due to the refusal of most flirfs to acknowledge their mistakes or learn from them. As a final wrap-up, I mentioned earlier that I'm sharing some resources in the description below. This includes 4 channels that I like, that debunk flat Earth claims quite regularly, including Simon Dan, Craig McNeil from Fight the Flat Earth, or FTFE, Dave McKeegan, and Conspiracy Tunes. I've also linked an almost 8-hour marathon from Veritas. a Flat Earth playlist from Professor Dave Explains, the Physics Explained video that I mentioned once or twice during my video, the Community Science Project from Simon Dan, and the Final Experiment YouTube channel. Anyway, I hope this was useful. My social media links and Patreon are in the description below. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you again next time.